We have to create the right vibe, the energy, and everybody at the organization has to feel so privileged to be here. It's no other way.
Thanks for listening to the Purely Arsenal podcast. Please follow us on Twitter at Purely Arsenal FP for all the latest Arsenal podcasts.
Welcome to another episode of a Purely Arsenal sit-down podcast. We're back in the new year and we're here to talk about the 2-0 loss at home, unfortunately, to Liverpool in the third round of the FA Cup. And I'm joined by Adam Keys, who's been on our podcast before from the Arsenal Therapy podcast. Adam, probably not that good, but how are you, mate?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. We recorded last night after the game. So I've had a bit of Arsenal therapy chat to get me through, and obviously got it with the result. How are you doing, mate? It's been a while since I've been on, so thanks for having me again.
It has. I was hoping it'd be under better circumstances. 1 win in 7, I believe it is. It's a time we're not that used to under Mikel Arteta, and we're definitely going for a pretty rough patch. So we've got some things to tackle and talk about and discuss, haven't we? Definitely. But yeah, fair play to you for doing it so soon. I find it pretty difficult after defeats to talk about stuff immediately. So I've always got a lot of admiration for the podcast that just jump on straight away when they've had a horrible game like this to discuss and things like that. But there are some things to talk about, and I think there's some positives certainly to take about it, even if they are very sort of similar things to what we would have been talking about after games like West Ham and things like that. I just wanted to get your thoughts on the lineup before we get into the game, really. We found out before the game that we found out like we always do. I'm sure you see it rushing in the day before, a few little words of these people that seem to somehow be standing outside team hotels every week and getting, team news. They're always quite accurate, aren't they? They said it before, the Thomas Partey stuff, and you always see it and you're like, oh, I know he's not going to be playing. And this time it was about Gabriel Jesus. So we found out, he had a minor knee problem. I just want to get your thoughts on that and thoughts on Ramsdale's return, Jorginho back in, Kirill maintaining his place at left back. What were your thoughts when you saw the lineup Havertz up front?
Yeah, well, I saw some stuff trickling through on Twitter on Saturday night about Jesus, and it was that prick Brown that shares stuff, and she is generally pretty accurate. I never get people that want to leak news about injuries for their own team, but they're out there, and as you say, they're pretty accurate. So obviously a bit disappointed and mainly concerned about Jesus, because two of us have talked a lot about needing a winger and so on, and that injury, it's another attacker and it puts us so thin on attacking options. But all in all, the lineup, with the exception of Jesus, I was pretty happy with. I've wanted Havertz to play up front for a while, and Jorginho coming in, I think he just gives us that balance in midfield. With KVR, again, I think that was pretty much, there was no choice but to play him. And he was pretty bad last week against Fulham. But it was one of those, my concern was that KVR would try to invert again. If he came out and played his game and played more as a left back, we would be fine. And I think the inclusion of Jorginho as the ball progressor, that's what I thought we would go with. So all in all, I was fairly happy with the lineup. I'm a big Jorginho fan, and I'm generally content seeing him on the pitch at any point. The only time I'm ever worried about Jorginho is if you've got three kind of hard runners in the team. That's where Chelsea did a number on us with Gallagher, Cazzetto and Palmer, or Enzo, sorry. They were just overrunning that midfield. But generally, Jorginho, you know exactly what you get. He's a pass master, a metronome, that kind of player. And I felt he was the right choice for the game. So how did you feel about the lineup?
Sorry, I'm making sure my mic's back on. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. I obviously frustrated a little bit on the Jesus front. I mean, I'm not 100% convinced on the reports yet that are saying about his minor knee injury. The main reason being we know what history he has with knee injuries, so maybe it's a little bit of that sort of feeling from my perspective, but also we haven't really been able, since Jesus has come in, been a revelation, I think, in terms of coming in since last season, but he's never really been able to have a sustained period of time fit. So I think there's almost an inevitability about Jesus and a feeling that, we're not that surprised. So I'll wait and see and hold out. But once I found out with that, I actually sort of was very, very happy with the lineup. I felt I was adamant that he shouldn't start Havertz and Eddie together like he did against Fulham last week. I feel like that's just a really bad idea because they're both pretty low touch players. I also think Havertz should be our secondary option at number 9 when Jesus isn't fit, if it's not going to be Trossard at least. I was happy with that. And like you, I couldn't understand last week either. I spoke about it offline quite a lot, that when Zinchenko didn't play, why he didn't bring Jorginho in, because they basically mimic our build-up play from deep, and I found that really odd. And I actually think Kirill, though we're going to get to the mistake, had a far sort of more capable game, and I think Jorginho was a big factor in that as well. And I thought Jorginho, alongside probably Odegaard, was probably our best outfield player, to be honest. And so yeah, lineup wise, I had no complaints other than the frustration with Jesus. So I don't think Eddie's good enough to be starting in games like this, and he didn't. And I didn't really have too many complaints. But as we get into the game, Adam, this is sort of this overwhelming, sort of continual frustrating feeling of sort of missed opportunities in the final third. And I'm sure you've been talking a lot on your podcast, but I just want to get your take on, because it's really a sort of this, I guess it's the story of the season in a way. I mean, this isn't something new with us. I think a lot of us spoke. I think last time I spoke to you, the front four weren't fully fit. And we've been talking on our podcast, and people have been pretty confident about once the front four came back, we'd be firing on all fronts. And on the one hand, we're creating a lot of chances, other than the Fulham game, which I think we can regard as basically an outlier in this season. And we are creating a lot of chances since this front four come back, but we're incredibly out of form, Adam, and we just lack the ability to be, the conviction, the clinical aspect, killer instinct, urgency, whatever you want to call it. But I just wondered what your overall take on it, because it's such a hard watch to see us constantly screw up in the final third.
Yeah, it's one of those, our play right now is elite right up to the final third. Everything we're doing is so good until it's that final action. It's not even the final third. It's because we're creating the chances. So like literally that final ball, it is the actual final action, the finishing action that we're lacking right now, and that's the frustrating thing. It's like, you'll remember it well, but Arsenal against United 2017, when De Gea made 30 saves or something daft like that, it kind of feels like that at the minute, where it's just, we can shoot all day and we're never going to score. And again, the two games were similar. That day United went down the other end, scored a couple of goals. Today or last night, we had the same thing, and it is that thing where you miss chance after chance after chance. The opposition manager is going to say to his players, "We've got a game plan. Look, they haven't scored yet. They're going to run out of steam. We're going to get this goal," and that's what happened yesterday. And the goal itself it kind of summed up the game for us. It's like, can't score at one end, stick it in your own net at the other. So, look, incredibly frustrating, but it's also one of those, it does fill me with a level of confidence, because 6 or 8 weeks ago we weren't creating chances, and you were looking at 1 or 2 chances a game that we had to take. Now we're just not taking them, but we're creating loads. So I do think if there's a time to hit this period, it's now, because we've got this 2-week reset that you can go get the heads down. Hopefully Thomas Partey's back. I'm, in my head, penciling them in for Forest on the 30th. I think that's realistic, given that he's kind of missing the AFCON and everything. That would take him well past on the group stages of that. So I do think if there's a time for the reset, it's now. I'd be really worried if this was in March or April, but I'm trying to remain optimistic, because it's clear we're a good side.
I agree on that front, and I think there's a lot of positives to take on it. I mean, some of the chances, Adam. I mean, first, I think it was second minute, Reece Nelson's through from a great ball from Ramsdale, who I think overall had a good game, a good return, especially since his last game, I want to say, was away against West Ham, and he didn't fill himself with glory there. So it was nice to see that. But Nelson's chance, Adam, Havertz had a few really poor chances where he just dithered for too long. Odegaard hitting the bar. Our high press against them they really struggled against it, I thought, early on, and we were fantastic in just winning the ball high up. But again, couldn't finish. And as we go into sort of second half, I felt Saka was really wasteful in the front four. I think, like you, I have a lot of positives to take from it, but I also have this sort of underlying feeling that whenever Arteta gets asked about was it 88 goals in the Premier League last season, he always says, well, that was a one-off for the league. So we didn't really expect us to mimic that. But I also look at our front four and the makeup of them. And as much as I love them, I don't see anyone there that I really think's that clinical. I don't know. They got so many goals last season, really because the volume of chances we created. And now we're creating that volume as well. So you expect the goals to come if we keep creating that volume. I have to say, though, I've got underlying sort of worries that we don't have the type of player. Like I was saying to someone last week, I went, if we compare ourselves to Liverpool and City, Liverpool got Salah, right? He can be dreadful, but you just know he's going to put one in out of the 6 shots that he takes each game. And City have got Haaland. I mean, it's easy to say it because they're such high level, but I don't think we have anyone to that level that we can rely upon to just, they're going to put it in the net week in, week out. I know Saka's the closest, but even for Saka, he's dreadfully off form.
Yeah, I think we've obviously had that from Aubameyang, where it was that inevitability that he would have scored. He could have done nothing. Again, another low-touch player that you could see Aubameyang having 15 touches in a game, still comes away with 2 goals at the end of the day. He gets those clinical ones. And I think I was talking on our pod last night about the Reece Nelson chance. How many times between Dortmund, Saint-Etienne and Arsenal did you see Aubameyang? That ball comes over the top. He doesn't chip the keeper. He puts it with his studs under the keeper. Those kind of things. But at the same time, I do have a lot of sympathy for Nelson because that's not an easy chance. It's a ball over the top and he has barely played any football. So you've barely been on the pitch. You get that chance in the second minute of the game. You're still feeling your way into it, and we're expecting kind of clinical striker actions from someone like that. So, but again, with the Salah point, like the two of us grew up with Thierry Henry and Robin van Persie and those kind of players. And Henry was the perfect example because he was another one that could have been dreadful in a game where he would have stood with his hands on his hips, sulking, drifted out left, throwing his arms around, and then the next minute he does something incredible. And Salah does it for Liverpool. Obviously, City of Haaland, who's a very different player, but just gets his toe on the end of things. And I think that's what we're lacking at the minute. And the names we're being linked to, I think, with the exception of like an Osimhen, that we're not going to do this window. I don't think those players are it. I think for me, and I think we're in agreement on this, it's a winger that can give us that elevation for the remainder of the season. But I think adding a winger, you get that bit more firepower because you look at City, they've got 4 wingers. They've always had 4 wingers. Liverpool have about 6 attackers that are all fairly multifunctional. And Arsenal have 3 forward players, and you throw Trossard in there. But we predominantly play with that same front 3. And one of the things I was thinking last night was we keep talking about a player for Saka to rotate with, to give Saka a rest. What about a player to drop Saka for? That's the thing that the elephant in the room we never discuss. And actually, he was brilliant in the first half, really, really good. Some of the things he did. But in the second half, he was very wasteful. He was playing like a frustrated player. He looked off his game. And if he was playing for City, he'd have got hooked. It wouldn't have mattered who he was. Like, look at the way Foden's treated at City. He's taken off the minute he stops performing. So's Grealish. Saka would have been taken off yesterday, and we don't have that player that we can take him off for. And I know you're a big fan of Pedro Neto. He's the kind of man that you could bring on in that circumstance. I like Nico Williams more because of his injury record than it. And but again, he's an option.
Has he recently signed a new contract, Nico Williams, though? He
signed a new contract last year that he had like a 38 million, 40 million release clause. It's now up to a 50 million release clause. So okay. It's still a pretty low release clause for kind of, you're looking at Doku value there. So yeah, but these players, and what frustrates me the most is Kudus was available for around 35, 40 million in the summer. Diaby was available for the same price. Elise had the release clause in the summer. There's 3 players that we could have gone out and got. Instead, we've gone out and got Raya on loan. And these kinds of things are all, I think, they've all got knock-on effects. And it seemed when we signed Fabio Vieira, instead of putting a bit more money and going out and getting Paqueta, it's like, it is frustrating because these things are putting real strains on our attacking three right now, and in midfield as well, we're light there. So yeah, I think the reality is when you look at the injuries we've got, our squad's a lot lighter than it looked at the start of the season. And when you compare it to City are just, people will say City don't have a big squad, but every player in that squad is top class. And that's the difference to City and everyone else. It's streamlined.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And look at City. They won everything last season, and they went and bought Doku for 65 million to enhance their attack this season. I know financially in a different area, but we gave Reece Nelson a new contract and didn't touch the front three, and we didn't win a thing. And I know a lot of people say, well, hold on a minute, we didn't have the money to buy a winger, but we wanted a winger, Adam, 18 months ago when we put in a 60 million bid for Rafinha. So the desire to get that winger was there. It's been there for a long time. So what I don't understand, because Trossard, I get we got Trossard, but Trossard, he's not the more you watch him, the more you see he's not a winger. I mean, he's more of an interior player. I like him a lot. Get him closer to the box and he can be really effective. I think he's more of an impact sub than a starting player for this team at the moment, but he doesn't strike fear into the defenders. And then really, I've felt it for a long time, but you make such a good point on where is the player that can potentially cause Saka or Martinelli to be dropped, because neither of them fear being dropped. Not one of them. And ever since the Villa game, when I was watching that, I was like, we are crying out for a player to just, because they're not doing it in this game and we're all over Villa, and all we need is a player to run in behind and time their run perfectly and not, and basically finish their chance. And we did not have that player to come on. We brought Trossard on, 60th, 70th minute, and it was the wrong player to bring on in that type of game. And I cannot understand, for me, that, a lot of people talk about the striker, but this game yesterday told us so many options centrally. There's so many. It might not be the perfect option, but there are so many options centrally. But if Saka goes down, we don't really know. Would he pick Reece Nelson? I know he started in this game, but he's not started a Premier League game since July 2020. There's no guarantees there. I don't really know who it would be. I think there'd be an argument to say could be any one of 3 or 4 players, because he doesn't have the trust in them. And in this game, you're right again, because I don't think Nelson should have come off. I don't think Nelson should have come off in this game. I think it killed our attack a little bit when he did come off, because I think he was lively. He had a 96% pass accuracy. He was good on the ball. Saka down at 70%, really wasteful in that early part of the second half. 2 volleys he had. If you remember, one he put over the bar awkwardly. The other one just completely miscued with his right foot. And I've never really felt as good as Saka was in front of goal last season. I have, and I don't know if you're going to agree with me here, but I've never really loved Saka one-on-one with defenders wide. And I felt for a while, when we spent the money on Havertz, I felt Saka could have been an option at the 8, and I still feel Saka could have been an option at the 8. And I felt that money could have been better spent on a Kudus or a Diaby to play wide, and then you could rotate Saka internally. Because the one thing with Saka is the probably the elite part of his makeup is his versatility. I mean, you can play him almost anywhere on the pitch. I mean, he's got that good of footballing brain. You can move him around. And I think we've missed a trick there, because he seems to like 6'5" basketball players in the centre of the pitch. But I don't know what your thoughts are on that. But just get you, did you feel the Reece Nelson sub was a poor one? Because maybe it's hindsight, but I didn't like it in the moment either. I thought he's doing quite well here. I would have moved Reece Nelson out to the right and brought Martinelli on.
I felt at the time Nelson was starting to come into the game, I thought he was fairly poor in the first half. My assessment of Nelson is generally the same, that he's got a lot of nice touches but doesn't do a lot. So he protects the ball well, he cuts inside, but he doesn't get beyond his man. He doesn't deliver that ball that I want to see. So right as Nelson came off, he had that moment where he played Havertz in, and it was lovely play down the left-hand side. And to be honest, when Martinelli came on, I thought he did quite well for a while. But I do agree that we could have looked at it the other way and thought, what, Saka's not actually doing much at this point. Is he tiring? Is it just not his day? Could you give that fullback a different option? Because I think it's one of those, as good as Saka is, sometimes when a fullback is starting to get more comfortable with you, it's very difficult to snap that back round and re-win the battle. So I would just like to see Mikel take Saka off more whenever it's not happening for him, and giving other players a chance, use his squad a bit better than we've seen so far. But yeah, that's really the only criticism I would have of Arteta yesterday, because I think that performance was on the players. You muted, mate.
Sorry. Look at that professionalism. The biggest issue I have is his rotation and his ability to sort of change in game. But I had no issue with the way Mikel Arteta set this game up. Whilst I think you could have had a lot of arguments against him against Fulham, for this game and the West Ham game, I largely put it down to the players. But I just think he's an option there. Like, I don't know why when I watch games, sometimes I'm like, Saka is getting, like against Fulham, Robertson had him in his back pocket, Saka. It wasn't going to change. So either take him off or move him inside. That's what I always say. I just move him inside, because one of the biggest things I see with Saka is his ability to drive through space and his close control. He's so good in those areas. I think he could be really effective as an option possibly at the left 8, especially if you move Havertz up to the 9. Wanted to get your thoughts on Havertz. What did you think of him in the 9? It was the first time we've really seen him in the 9 since the Community Shield for a long period. You could argue he did it against Brentford late on and things like that. But what were your thoughts on Havertz's overall performance?
I think there's two sides to it. I thought as a 9, as a target man, he did really well. And it's one of those, if you look purely at Havertz's kind of aerial numbers and what he's won, it was pretty low yesterday. But if you look at what it caused off the back of that, no Liverpool defender had a free header the whole game. Kanate and was it Kwanzaa playing alongside him? The two of them, they weren't getting their headers to other Liverpool players. Just the big presence of Havertz was allowing us to scoop up that second ball time and time again. And I think with the new generation of football fans that live off purely on stats but don't understand what necessarily the stats mean, they don't get the second ball aspect. They don't get the presence on the pitch. And if you look at when we had Giroud up front, a lot of games, if Giroud didn't win the header, he was pressed against the defender. He wasn't letting them get that ball to the man. And arguably at the time, Giroud was the best target man in the world. Just couldn't finish. And it's one of those, for me, Havertz was really strong in that area. He was holding the ball well. He was creating space. I like the fact that we had a central focal point, because as much as I love Gabriel Jesus, sometimes I think when he drifts, it can congest the pitch a bit. And last year he was drifting to the left and he was linking well with Martinelli. This year he's drifting a lot more to the right. And we know that Odegaard and Saka like to compete for that same zone. Whereas with Havertz through the middle, I felt that Saka had a bit more space to operate. Saka was able to come infield as well. And I thought Odegaard just playing with that bit more depth in his game, it allowed him to really create and pull the strings a bit more. So that side of his game I really liked. He also created two big chances. The first one for Reece Nelson, that I think it might have been Kanate cuts it out. It's a really, really good tackle. I thought he could have pulled it back to Saka instead if he was just that bit more aware at the time. And then he had the other one where he crossed it in. Big Gabby could have headed it. I don't quite know what happened. It seemed Gabriel just left it, and Saka's, to be fair to Saka, his body position's completely off whenever he hits that ball. But then there's the finishing aspect with Havertz. As you said, he dithered on a couple of chances. There's the one Odegaard plays him in. And again, that's a funny one because Odegaard gives it first time, but there's no weight at all on the ball. So he gets it. He takes a touch. Then his second touch is really, really poor. And it leads to a third touch. And the shot is really weak. He's got the header that he should. Again, it's not the easiest header he is leaning. He's got a defender between him and the ball. But I'm a firm believer of if you get contact on the ball in that area, you have to direct it towards goal. And I think that's the thing that we've seen with top strikers over the years, that if they're able to get reach the ball in that area, they will get it on target. And I don't think Havertz is ever going to be a kind of 20, 25 goal a season striker. But I do think he could get you kind of 15 goals in that position in the way Giroud used to, but he'll give you a lot more overall across the pitch. And as an option, as a 9 for the rest of the season, I think it's something that we should explore more. But next season, I want that top tier striker next season, be it an Osimhen and possibly Evan Ferguson, that you do take the 12-month hit because he's going to need more development. He's not there yet. You're going to have to pay top-tier wage salaries and so on, but he isn't there. But right now, I think Havertz is certainly, alongside Jesus, the best option as a 9. I think Trossard's really dropped off recently. And I just... Nketiah frustrates me more than any other player. I think it's because I want him to be good. It's like I see flashes where I think, oh, maybe this is it. Maybe this is it. And then it's back to not running, not working hard enough. And it's something... The data tells you that he's not involved in games enough. The eye test tells it, and yet people will tell you Nketiah is a hard worker for Arsenal. I just don't get it. I don't see what he's bringing on the pitch. And every time we start with him up front, we look like a worse side. He doesn't link with Martinelli. He doesn't link with Havertz. And I just look at Havertz yesterday and what he was doing to bring others into the game. That's what I want to see a bit more of from Nketiah. And it was such a mixed performance, but overall, I did like what I saw from Havertz.
Yeah, and for me, this really kind of highlighted, I know we lost the game, but it highlighted to me how Eddie shouldn't be our secondary option. And I think there's an argument that he probably shouldn't be our third option centrally. And that really tells me, and I hope it kind of hints to Arteta, though he seems to have this underlying consistent faith in Eddie Nketiah, where he just doesn't want to even encourage bids from other teams. But I really hope there's some movement on Eddie in this window, because I do feel that's a player we could probably most likely our most sellable asset in this window. And obviously we know we need to raise funds, so I'm slightly hopeful or optimistic, but not holding it out for too much, but that we could probably encourage some bids there, because I think I don't think he's needed. I don't think he's needed in the squad. I don't think it weakens us in terms of players that we can use, and I think it would allow us to actually purchase maybe in a wide area where we've already discussed where I think we're weak. But I agree with you on Havertz. I mean, he doesn't have a lot of touches, 35 touches in the game, but I think his overall effect on the game and our play. We always look at like how we play. Noticed he was far more connected to the rest of the group than Eddie is, and far more difficult for their centre-backs to hold. And like you said, it just takes up space, and then it opens up and frees up the environment for our wide players to sort of flourish a little bit more. And I think you saw a lot of that in the first half. Unbelievably frustrated that we didn't go in probably a couple of goals up, or at least up, in the first half. And you had this overwhelming sense of, oh, we're going to pay for this. And I think in the second half, you saw a different Liverpool, to be honest. I mean, as much as I thought I think we ended up with like 1.9 XG to their 0.85. But a lot of that, I haven't got the data, but a lot of our good chances were created in the first half. I want to say, a good sort of 70% of them were. In the second half, they came into the game a lot more. But I found it really interesting how sort of involved Declan Rice was from the 8 as well. I think he can do a job there. I think he might be our best option there at times as well. I know Havertz won Player of the Month. Recently, and that was largely playing in the 8 position. But Declan Rice, I mean, he was our highest touch player in the game. Just when he can bring a different, and I think we've seen less of that because Thomas Partey would probably be the one playing in behind him, and obviously he's not been fit all season basically. But like you said before, the one thing we're doing now that we weren't doing earlier in the season is creating a hell of a lot more chances, which is encouraging. But the one thing we are doing now, Adam, is that we weren't doing maybe earlier in the season, is we're making really big errors leading to goals. And I don't know what's happened on our set pieces, but I just wondered if you could discuss that for me. I mean, we seem to be conceding a hell of a lot from set pieces. And what were your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, we discussed this last night in the pod as well. It's a massive concern. I think this one's as bad as it comes, because whenever we did the pod last night, I'd just seen the angles that were on TV. Since then, obviously, stuff pops up on Twitter. You see it in a bit more detail. And we were discussing kind of who's at fault for it and so on. And whenever you were watching a kind of post-match analysis on TV, which is generally dreadful anyway, it didn't give a lot away, but I saw the angle from the camera behind the goal, and it's like KVR's facing that ball. He's there to head it, and he goes to head it one way, it comes off his face and goes the other way. It was at the time I thought, look, it's Trent Alexander-Arnold. It's a great ball into the box. It's the last player you want to give a free kick to in that position. But actually, no. Trent just pops it into an area and Arsenal put it in their own goal. And I think Ramsdale's positioning I don't know why he's coming for that ball there. It's one of those, stay in your line, and if he stayed in his line, he deals with that because the ball's not coming kind of into the middle of the box. Trent put it at the near post. So I think it's just really, really poor defending. But I think your point about the number we're conceding, that's the one that worries me more. We conceded against Fulham from a set piece. We've conceded loads from set pieces recently, and that's the biggest worry for me. West Ham again, Mavropanos goal, that was a free header. These are goals that we weren't conceding last season, and goals that we weren't conceding at the start of the season either. So it's a real worry for me, and one that I think over the next 2 weeks, it's something that has to be given a real focus to, because I do wonder if, in the way that our people say our attacking player has been found out a bit, I don't think that's true, because I don't think you create as many chances as we did if people have figured out how to stop you. I think that's just our finishing. But I do wonder if there's the other end of Arsenal defend in a specific way. It's that mix of man-to-man and zonal. Our team's looking at how we're defending and thinking, actually, there's your weakness, hit that area, do this. This player can be dragged out if you put the ball in this area. And in the way that Arsenal have benefited from set-piece analysis and the work that's been done, every other team's doing this in the training ground as well. And sometimes we forget that as fans, that it's not just us playing the game, that the other teams have the same level of prep, the same kind of analysis going into the game. And I do wonder if it just needs a bit of tweaking to kind of get those players fired up and get them analysing those mistakes again. And part of the warm weather training, there's probably going to be a lot of analysis done where there's only ever so much training done on these trips. A lot of it is spent watching TV, and like you'll hear Ben White talking about, he really hates that side of it, but it's such an important part of football now. It's literally sitting with the likes of Carlos Cuesta and coaches like that to look at where you're going wrong. What are you doing well? What can you do more? And right now, set pieces is that big area. It kind of feels like no one's taken charge of them. So last year, whenever we got a corner, I never thought we would concede. If anything, I thought this is an opportunity for a counter. Now it's like every set piece, no matter where it is in the pitch, I think we're going to concede. You get a free kick on the halfway line, long ball into the box, this is an opportunity for them. That's how bad we are defensively right now from set pieces.
Yeah, and when you see, I mean, this wasn't, I think just before the goal, or it might have been just after, but I think it was just before the goal. Jota wins a header from a corner against Saliba. I mean, the guy's 5'6", and he's flying above Saliba, which I was really upset with Saliba from that corner actually, and he hits the bar. So it wasn't like we hadn't had fair warning. I can't remember for the life of me who gave away the free kick. Was it Ben White that gave away the free kick to Trent? I'm not sure if it was. Do you know?
For the goal? For
the goal, yeah.
That was Odegaard. So again,
Odegaard, was it?
A bit like Saka with his kind of frustrations during the game. I felt that when Odegaard gave that away, that was frustration. Gravenberch stuck it through his legs and he kind of dragged him down, and it was...
I remember it now.
It was one of those that Declan Rice is right beside him, and I think, look, he's going nowhere. We've got enough players in that area. Don't take him down in that position. But it was just pure frustration, and I think it was a game. Everything yesterday was our own undoing. Like the missed chances, the own goal. The second goal was just, it added insult to injury. It was one of those that I'm glad that we were going for it. We were committing players forward. I would rather lose 2-0 than see it out 1-0 and not go for it. But it really flattered Liverpool.
Yeah, no, it did, and that was when broken play, when you kind of got to go for it. I think that's my biggest frustration, is at 1-0 it felt like we'd lost a bit of impetus, and it didn't feel like we had the courage or the belief to come back, and I don't think the changes did us any favours at that point. But just to go back on the goal, I mean, yeah, you're right. Now I remember it, Odegaard was just growing really frustrated, and I think largely probably from missed opportunities in the final third, and obviously he hit the bar. But I feel Odegaard's been the best player in our front four in this really barren patch of the front four. I feel he's the one that's constantly probing, trying, and I feel he's been pretty good through this bad patch, if anyone can be, through the front four, and the least wasteful, if you like. But I remember he was making a few fouls at that time, and he was just growing quite frustrated with the referee. But I think Kivior does bad because he looks like he kind of takes his eye off the ball almost. But I don't want to say it's big error. I don't think it is. But I don't think Ramsdale's covered himself in glory with that one either. I think he's kind of come in and flapping for that. And I don't think he's getting to it whether Kivior does or not. There's too many bodies there. So at that point, I saw Alisson do one maybe 5 minutes later, and he's just so confident coming out for the ball, and he's going to grab it amongst the melee of players. And I've never really had that confidence with Ramsdale from crosses. It's my biggest gripe from him. And I'm not saying Ray is perfect, but I do think he's better from crosses than Ramsdale, despite his sort of lack of height and things like that. So, there's been a lot of debate with the goalkeepers. I don't really want to go into it now. I think there's an argument, certainly, that we should only have one of them at this point, and I think that's a fair argument. But I thought he had a good game, Ramsdale, and he made a great save from Luis Diaz. But for that goal, I felt Kivior and possibly him were at fault. But then you have to make the argument that Odegaard was for making the foul in the first place.
Yeah, and I think part of Odegaard's frustration came from being kicked multiple times. And I think the first half, whenever we were really on top, I was getting really frustrated with the ref. I felt that there was a lot of quite aggressive challenges not penalised. And if they were, it was a free kick. And whenever a yellow card can be given, I feel like a player gets a warning against Arsenal. Whenever a player in our team commits those fouls, the yellow card comes out straight away. And we know why that is. It's because Arteta's riled them up so much. And as much as I agree with what Arteta said about the Newcastle game, I think ultimately he's created a rod for his own back, because let's face it, it's a boys' club, the referee in England. They're all from the same area of the country. They all look the same. They all support the same clubs. You've attacked one of their own, and you've then won the case as well. So we're not going to get any favours from refs. And I do feel that our players aren't being protected. There was a stage yesterday, Odegaard was kicked 2 or 3 times within pretty much a minute of play. And I think that's where the frustration was coming from around the time of the free kick. But I also agree, overall, Odegaard's been probably our best player. And I think he's back to his absolute best, because the Fulham game, I was a bit frustrated with both him and Saka, because I felt they were really occupying that right space, and neither of them were given. Well, Odegaard wasn't given Saka the space he needed. Saka was playing his position, but Odegaard has that tendency to drift into that area. And I do think a lot of that, especially last season, was instructional. But when you see him dropping deeper, like again yesterday, the chances he created, the work rate, some of the duels he wins to come out with the ball, and how aware he is the minute a ball breaks, he's straight in there, scooping it up and driving forward. And that's not the player that we saw 3 years ago when he arrived on loan. You have to give a lot of credit to Arteta for taking a nice, fancy touch player and making him a dual monster, as well as all those other things that he's got, because De Bruyne gives you all that. And that's what I love about Odegaard right now. And on top of all the kind of the physical side of the running, the pressing, the duels, he is just a joy to watch. Like, I could watch Odegaard play football all day, and I thought yesterday he was our best player.
Yeah, he's my favourite player, Odegaard. I think he's fantastic, and I can't believe some of the. I feel frustrated. I feel he should just get so many more assists to his name. And the one frustration I have with him is I want him to take more responsibility in the final third. I feel even yesterday you saw he had the ball edge of the box, 20 yards out, open space, and he decided to lay it off. And every time I would say to him, shoot. Every time. I think he's our best finisher from a distance in the front four, by quite a distance. And every time he's got an opportunity to shoot on the edge of the 18-yard box, he needs to take a leaf out of someone like Frank Lampard's book, who I didn't like at all as a football player, to be honest. But his whole career was based off just shooting all game, wasn't it? It was just shoot from anywhere. And Odegaard genuinely should be doing that, because he'd get bag full of goals rather than laying it off. And it would be different if he was laying it off to a Haaland, but he's not. He's laying off to these wasteful finishers for the last 6 weeks. Yeah. Just take the shot on. That's the one thing I get frustrated with him. Other than that, on the ball, fantastic. And I think this type of midfield, Jorginho and Rice, this is when you'll see the best out of Thomas Partey. Out of Odegaard, because he's not falling so deep. You noticed in some of the last games he's done quite well at it, but he's drawn himself deeper and deeper to help, because Havertz is obviously often this one that's sort of playing a little bit higher up and often finding himself lost, I think, in the midfield. And this sort of balance, I think, is better for Odegaard. And you want the balance to be better for your best players, and I think Martin Odegaard is definitely one of our best players. So I agree with you on that. And very frustrated. I mean, the set piece, we can keep going over it, but we've definitely got an issue there, which is odd because like you said, we were so good from set pieces, attacking and defending, very, very recently under the same set piece coach. So what has happened there? I don't know. I hope they can figure it out. Or maybe it is a confidence thing like the finishing. Adam, you see it once and then we start to get nervous about it and things like that. But again, giving set pieces away to Liverpool like that, it wasn't the only one that they looked dangerous from. So it wasn't like we hadn't seen it coming. And at that point, I mean, this is where I sort of talk about Arteta. There's been a lot of talk about Arteta recently about not giving youngsters a fair shot, but also not being able to make in-game changes to really change the direction of the game. You saw it against West Ham, where I feel we should have won the game. Didn't really change the game very well. And those changes kind of killed us a little bit in the last 20, and that was probably the most comfortable period of West Ham's sort of win. I just wonder what your thoughts are on, one, the youngster thing, where I don't think he gives as much opportunities as maybe some other coaches. I think that might be a fair point, but also the sort of lack of trust that he has in the squad that he's built.
Yeah, it's a frustrating one, because I think Smith Rowe is the one that you have to look at and say, bringing him on 87 minutes into the game, whenever we just needed that bit of a spark. It's, look, Mikel can say whatever he wants, but right now actions are speaking louder than words with Emile Smith Rowe. And Smith Rowe is a player, look, I think every one of us loved watching him. We all saw a huge future for him. But the reality is, if he's not going to play and he's not trusted by Arteta, he's someone that we can cash in on. There's numerous clubs that are interested. Villa have had and retain interest in him. Emery was the one that really brought him through at Arsenal, gave him his first opportunities, has always been a huge fan of his. He's someone I think would fit in very well at Aston Villa. And if a money offer came through of, I don't know, 35 million or something like that, because I think he's still at the point where you can get a decent fee for him, but that's going to start dropping very soon. And for me, if he's not trusted, he's someone that can be moved on. In the same way you said about Nketiah, if you could move the two of them on in January and bring in a player that could make a big impact, say you got 60 million for the two of them, which I don't think is unrealistic, and that goes down on pure profit as FFP because they are academy players. There's two assets that you can sell without really impacting the squad, because Smith Rowe is not playing. Bring in one player that actually Arteta does trust. So, like, my two criticisms of Arteta are not rotating enough whenever kind of it gets later in games, taking players off whenever we're 4 or 5-0 up. Similarly, throwing players into games whenever we don't need them. And the other one is not trusting and rotating his squad properly, because, as I said with Nelson in the first minute, the bloke hasn't played football all season, and you pointed out it was July or August 2020 that he had his last start. That was against Liverpool when he scored as well.
I remember that.
That's 3.5 years ago, and he's on $100,000 a week. So it's absolutely mad. And we've got Cedric there on $100,000, and he's not good enough. But at the same time, these are players that are in the squad that Arteta's put together, and I just think he needs to trust the squad a bit better. And the point about young players, again, I agree with you there. Klopp is, and always has been, very good at throwing them in. I think Arteta put a lot of faith in Smith Rowe, Saka, and Nketiah whenever he came in. Obviously, it is a young team, and Saliba and so on, they're all young players. But what I was saying last night is the likes of Ethan Nwaneri, when it wasn't going well, if Arteta threw him in at 1-0 and it didn't go to plan, no one says, I threw it was Nwaneri's fault. I don't think it gives Nwaneri any kind of dip in confidence, because I've seen young players come in and they make their careers off the back of that. And if it doesn't go well, they go back, they play under 18s, 21s, whatever it is, and they continue to work on the training ground and they get better and they learn from it. And I went to watch the under 21s play against Sunderland recently, and when Harry was on the pitch, he was playing against Bradley Dack, who has about 400 championship appearances under his belt. He'd been at Coventry or Blackburn for the last 6 years. And just a real kind of accomplished championship player, really, really solid. Ranieri wasn't fazed by the physicality at all. He positionally matched him for the game and he looked like the better player. And this was a guy that knows that level inside out. And I do think that's a player. Same with Lewis Skelly. I've got a lot of doubts about Raul Walters. I watch a lot of the youth teams when I can. And I don't think he's anywhere near ready. But Ranieri and Lewis Skelly, I think there's two players that you can throw in. Lino Souza as well. Give those players a chance. And in games like this, because you're looking at it now and thinking, when are they going to get a chance? Because we're out of both cups. We're now at the knockout stages of the Champions League. We're under big pressure in the league to really kind of regain form. And other managers are giving youth players a chance. Even Pep's starting to give young players a chance. But with Arsenal, it's not like we've got the squad that's deep enough that you can say, well, actually, there's 6 attackers that are all top class ahead of you. With Ranieri, you're looking at it and thinking, in that left 8 role, who is really shining right now? Who's ahead of him that is so far ahead of him that he can't get 10 minutes off the bench? Same with Smith Rowe. And I think that's where I'm frustrated with Arteta, because I think if you don't give these players a chance 10, 15 minutes when you're 4-0 up, whenever you're 1-0 down and you're chasing a win, you can't expect them to be 100%.
Yeah, it's true. He wouldn't even give him a chance in a dead rubber away at PSV, would he? So, you thought you were going to see 1 or 2 youngsters there for maybe even 5 or 10 or 15 minutes, and he wouldn't give them a chance there. And I find it a little bit frustration. I think people have got a fair point when they argue that. And then, he just doesn't trust enough. And now it's pretty much 95% his squad, that he built. He either gave a new contract to the player or signed them. And so it's basically his squad. So I find it really interesting that he just seems to keep his close group so small. And I think that's not good. I mean, he would never have made that change at 1-0 up at Anfield like Klopp did. He brought on 2 youngsters that I'd never heard of, Jurgen Klopp. And in fairness, Mikel Arteta would never have made that change at 1-0 up, 1-0 down. He just wouldn't have made that change. He wouldn't have done it. Even though, Liverpool have got a depleted squad like a little bit like we have right now, he just wouldn't have made it. And I think our youngsters are better. I don't know what their youngsters are like exactly, Liverpool's, but when Ranieri and Lewis Skelly, you've watched more of them than I have, but every time I watch them, they look really exciting. Pre-season, they look really exciting. I think, you've got to give them opportunities, at least, look, small opportunities, just to keep them, they're training with the first team every day, just to keep them sort of believing that they have a pathway. So I find that a little bit frustrating. I also felt some of the changes were just too late, right? Trossard Smith Rowe was like 87th, 88th minute. I mean, I don't know really what you want them to do, and we're chasing the game. So I feel sometimes he just sort of plays like for like and makes a change. I know he tried to switch to a back 3. It's not really worked. We were better at chasing games last season, actually, which is interesting from the bench. We're 2-0 down against Bournemouth, things like that. We were better at chasing games in a way then, and hopefully he flips it again, because earlier on in the season I was praising him for his substitutions in a lot of games, against Man City at home and things like that. But I do think the youngsters' part is a bit of a worry and a theme under Mikel Arteta. He could lose some of this group and some of these youngsters, because they're only going to feel like they can get opportunities by going out on loan somewhere, which I think for some works, but for some we're going to need to keep it as part of it. Adam, just before you go, I mean, like you said, the Diaz goal is a finish that, well, we'd love our strikers to be doing right now, and we were doing last season, isn't it? I don't think Diaz is specifically that prolific, but that's a sign of a player that's sort of high in confidence, and something we're really massively lacking. I mean, as much as I feel we need an attacking player, I think all of our forwards are massively low on confidence. If you could do one thing in this transfer window, one thing incoming wise, what would it be? Who would you go for? That's realistic, of course.
I think you look at a winger or a forward, basically a multifunctional forward, whether that's a winger or a striker. I think the reality is we are restricted by FFP. We know that. So assuming we're not selling anyone right now, I'd be looking at a winger that can come in. I agree with your point. You've been talking a lot on Twitter about it, which is we've spent a fortune on defenders. Arteta's bought defender after defender since he's been here, but he's barely spent anything on the attack. And there's a reason attackers cost so much money. It's because they decide games for you. And for me, you maybe look at, like, Spurs have just brought in Timo Werner, who's a player that I quite like. Werner. He's not a finisher, but I think if you know how to use Werner, he adds something to your team. And I think it's quite a good fit for Spurs right now, especially with Son away at the Asia Cup. But that deal actually gives me some hope that there's a couple of good fits out there for us. And I think you maybe look at someone like Ferran Torres at Barcelona, depending on kind of the game time, who's willing to let a player go. But that's what I'd be looking at. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I know me and you agree completely positionally. I have two major thoughts on this window. One is I agree with you on the FFP stuff. We have to, without seeing a sale over the next couple of weeks, I'm not very confident in making the purchase because we have to see a sale. And in order to do that, Mikel Arteta has to stop being so stubborn in players like Eddie Nketiah, because people have talked to me about Ramsdale and Smith Rowe and Nelson. I don't personally see actual money coming in for those players in this window. I think maybe there'll be like loan offers and things like that, but I can't see someone slapping down proper money for them. But Eddie Nketiah, 5 goals in the Premier League so far this season, England international, and some teams in this league that you can see need a central striker. I could see money coming in for him if we're willing to accept it, and maybe that allows us to do something. But absolutely, I agree. I think there's been a talk. The second thing is, I think there's been talk about defensive reinforcements. I don't think he should be allowed to do it. I think Mikel Arteta is fantastic. I do not think we should be allowed to give him any money for defensive reinforcements. He has given so much money out to defensive reinforcements in this team. If we can't handle Tomiyasu not being back till February and the latest Zinchenko minor calf injury, then I'm sorry, he's not good enough coach. He shouldn't be given money for a fullback. Do we need it long term, a new centre-back to challenge or to help Saliba and Gabriel and maybe another? Maybe, but I don't think it should be. He needs to find a way to make Kivior work or invert from the other side or something like that. He needs to find a way for 3 or 4 games to get himself through that. So I'm really adamant that he should not be given money for defensive reinforcements. As much as it might worry us a little bit, I think he shouldn't be allowed that. And I think that money should be placed on a winger where we've never spent any money on first choice wingers in whole of Mikel Arteta's tenure, and he spent a lot of money. And Ferran Torres is a really interesting one because I don't think he is starting very much for Barcelona. We know they need a little bit of money, so that could be a really interesting one. My choice would be Pedro Neto. I think he's available this window. I think Wolves want someone to bid for their players. I've seen some links from Max Kilman from Wolves, and he's one of their best centre-backs. But they're actually kind of, if you read their fan base, and I'm a loser and I do that sort of stuff, I see they kind of want bids for their players because they don't really have a lot of money to play with. They've already made a few attempts to sign players this window, but it's mainly loans that they're making, and they're removing players in order to do that. So I think Neto is the biggest issue with him is his injury record. I'd take the risk on him. I really would. He's top assist maker in the league currently, and he hasn't played a game barely since October. He can play on both sides. He's 2-footed. He's 23. He's vastly experienced. He's a Portuguese international. He, to me, is the best winger in the league at the moment other than Mo Salah. I think he is. And I would put 60 million if we could afford it and try to get him into the club by January. I really like your link with Nico Williams because he can play both sides too from what I've seen, I think, and he looks really, really good and dangerous. I quite like Bakayoko at PSV, but I have this sort of worry in January that those players might take time to settle, and obviously in January your goal is to get a player in that can hit the ground running, right? So I completely agree with you. It's a little bit different on the player maybe, but I completely agree with you in terms of positionally what we should be doing, because I don't see the central striker being optional.
Yeah, in terms of talent and fit, Pedro Neto is a player that I love. It's just the injury record. And if he was fit and picked up one minor injury a season, I'd be like, go out, get him. The issue that I have is obviously the broken patella. That's a freak injury. I don't remember another player ever suffering that injury. It's just such a freak one. But then he had the ankle injury last season that kept him out. He had muscular injuries. And if you look back through his record, it's not pleasant reading. But
ACL tear, wasn't it, as well? Yeah, I think.
I don't think he's done his ACL. I thought he had, but
no, I think he did. I think he did. That's why he was out for 12 months. Let me just check. Hold on. I've looked at his injury record a lot. Let me double check. But I think that was why he was out 12 months. He might have fractured his patella alongside it. But Pedro Neto injury history, because I was looking at his injury history and I was like, that was the major one that would be a big concern to me. But let me have a quick look. Knee injury, because patella fracture shouldn't keep him out for that long. 297 days. 297 days shouldn't be just a patella fracture. He must have done some serious ligament damage there. But let me triple check it. But either way, yeah, there's definitely a concern, isn't there, with his knee injury? And then he had the ankle one, of course. That you
yes,
said.
You're right. He has done his ACL.
Yeah, so I presume, I don't remember the impact, but I presume the fracture patella maybe came alongside it with the ACL because the fracture patella, I mean, I've dealt with that a couple of times with some of my athletes, and that's a really rare injury, but you would actually come back pretty quickly from that. But the ACL tear is what would keep him out for that 297 days for sure, I think, which is a concern. But the one thing I would say is that the biggest concern with ACL tears, and I know he's had a few injuries since, is that first 12 months after it. So I'd have a hopeful optimism that he would actually have less injuries now. I know he picked up a hamstring injury recently as well, but definitely his injury record is a concern. I think that's probably why we wouldn't maybe do it. But we've had strong links to him for it's not like we're sort of making that up, is it? We've had strong links to him for a while. So
yeah, 100%. And if you listen to the likes of James McNicholas at The Athletic, he's talked regularly about Arteta's long-term interest in Pedro Neto. And with Arteta, he doesn't tend to give up on his targets. I think that's one of the things. He does target players of a certain age, and if it takes another 12 months to get them, he knows that they're still within the age bracket that he can go out and get them. So Neto's definitely one that I would like to see. I think we would have to sell to buy him. But if we could get someone like that in January, I think it would just give the squad a lift. My issue with the striker argument, and I've said this on Twitter as well, is I think it excuses the kind of current squad of responsibility. It's like, go and get a striker. Arsenal just need a striker. Get a striker, everything will change. It's like, actually, you look at the variety of players that the chances are falling to: Saka, Odegaard, Martinelli, Jesus. Those players scored 60 goals between them last season. They can all finish. Even this season, Saka's got 9 goals. Odegaard's got, 7 or 8? Jesus has been scoring in the Champions League. He's got 7 goals in total this season. Havertz has got 4 or 5 goals, and Kenny has got 6 goals. Those players have been scoring goals. It's just the last few games, it's just been so wasteful. And I think the striker thing, I think we need an elite forward. It has to be a top tier. My worry with someone like Ivan Toney, even though I rate him very highly, is that in 18 months' time, you need another player. And with Trossard, I think we're already starting to see the end of Trossard. And again, I really like Trossard. I just don't quite know where he fits into the squad anymore, because his best football came as a false 9 for Arsenal. And I think when we need to move Partey on, we need to potentially look at Jorginho. I would extend Jorginho for another year, just because I think what's the point in letting him go when he's always fit, he's always available, and he's not going to get any slower. So like those kind of things. But I think there's only so many players you can upgrade in a window. And for me, someone like Tony to spend the kind of level of money that is required to then upgrade again in 18 months, it's just not a good use of funds. But I could be wrong. He could come in and be an absolute superstar, but I just don't see it at this time.
Yeah. Last question before you go. Do you think, I know we talked about what we want, but do you think we will do anything in this window?
I think we'll do a loan. And I think there's always in January stuff that comes up, and players become available because they're a bit frustrated. They want to play football, and because it's the Euros in the summer as well. So there's going to be players that are international footballers that are a bit frustrated with the amount of game time, and they're maybe at a club that has got multiple forwards. I think Barcelona are a club to look at. Rafinha is one that I find interesting because we've been linked to him heavily before, and he's in and out of the team at Barcelona. And I do wonder, again, with Arteta holding long-term interest in his players, if he could be one that's actually available, because Barca need money, and it could be that you pay a hefty loan fee for him. But like last year, we all thought it was mad, the fee that Chelsea paid for João Felix. And there are rumours that Felix could go back to Atletico and be available for another loan. So again, because Barca are struggling financially, but look, these deals, I think, if it came to paying a daft loan fee like 8 or 10 million to get someone in for 6 months, you have to weigh up. It's a one-off loan fee. You have them for 6 months. Do they elevate the squad to a level that you need? So I think we will bring someone in on loan. I just hope it's an attacker and not another defender.
Yeah, same. You make a really good. I mean, Ferran Torres and Rafinha, just did a little check on them. They both played a lot less minutes than Eddie Nketiah this season. So they're not playing. Eddie Nketiah doesn't, I mean, he started a lot of games, and then he's not really played a lot for the last few months. So I think Rafinha's only played 670 minutes this season. So they're not
very little. Very
little. Yeah, Eddie Nketiah is almost at 1,000. So that's interesting. Ferran Torres is around 800. So that's interesting. I haven't even looked at the Barca and thought about sort of loaning attacking options, but you made me think now, maybe thought about maybe other options. But hopefully, like you said, I'd be accepting of a loan if it's an attacking wide option. And they both kind of excite me, those type of players, to come in and give us something different. So hopefully we do something. Adam, thank you. Sorry for you taking up too much of your time. We're at Purely Arsenal FP on Twitter. If you've got any questions for us, if you want to follow the podcast, just type in Purely Arsenal and subscribe on YouTube, and subscribe to Arsenal Therapy Podcast. They do stuff every day, way more than we do. They're way more regular, and you should follow Adam and the guys there. They do great stuff, and I interact with them as much as I can as well. Adam, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Hopefully we'll be a little bit of a break here, but then we'll come back to some proper form against Palace. Fingers crossed, mate.
100%. Thanks for having me, Jack.
Top man, up the Arsenal.